All right, I'll maybe start with a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Anna Katrina Shedlutsky. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of a company called Instrumental. Uh, for the last 10 years, yes, 10 years, that's how long we've been at this. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the most admired electronics companies in the world and seeing inside their operations, and was inspired to do this particular session after about 2 weeks ago. We saw a lot of our customers and prospects who were still building in China, whether it was MPI or production in China. That was the week that they decided to pull the trigger. So sometime in mid-April to pull the trigger on finally getting out. I think the understanding that dawned across the industry that maybe the China retaliation tariffs were not going to go away. And so they needed to make other plans from a business perspective. We're still seeing that in general, companies that are building outside of China, even if those countries have high tariff rates today, based on those retaliatory tariff rates, that there is some sort of expectation across the industry that those will be negotiated. And so there's no urgency at this moment to move from places like Vietnam or Thailand to other places because it's unclear yet exactly what the tariff rates will end up being. That's what we're seeing in our customer base, is kind of how they're adapting to the situation. One of the things I want to kind of share about is that we are learning from our customers that they're really focused on their speed and ability to get up and running quickly in these new sites, that it's all about speed to full rate production anywhere else than where they are in China. And they've started to think about their daily burn rate as it relates to tariffs themselves. So if you think about, if you're in China and you're building units for production and there's 150% tariff because there's the base tariff plus the retaliatory tariff on top, and you're not in one of those exemption categories which expire in a few days anyway, then it's that times your daily rate of production that you're paying in a daily cost for building in China versus somewhere else. So companies are moving. Some of them have pretty I don't want to call them unrealistic, but pretty challenging goals in terms of their timelines to get out. But clearly, everybody's trying to move really quickly here, and every day of delay really matters. Even hours can matter. The reason Instrumental is relevant here, I'm just going to be open kimono for 1 minute, and then we're going to get into our expertise, is that our technology is really good at this. If we're trying to get up and running in a new factory as soon as possible and days and hours matter, like this is where Instrumental really shines. We've spent a decade accelerating NPI. You're effectively redoing an NPI, at least for one build, at least your control build at your new site. We can land and deliver value very quickly, and we're often accelerating generally days, if not weeks, out of an NPI schedule. And so on an individual build basis, I think there's a huge opportunity to potentially avoid an entire additional bring up build at a new factory. So our context for today is I've collected a bunch of experts from my network that I really respect, who have their finger on various pulses of this particular problem with their own customer bases or their own personal experiences. And we're going to do essentially a day's worth of content in an hour or less. We do have a Q&A at the end. So if there's questions, feel free to shoot them in to the Q&A section along the way. We can answer them at the end. We could also have some live discussion then as well. So we're going to cover some key areas. We've got these experts on the line, and it's going to be action-packed 5 or 6 webinars in one. So we'll start with Andre Newman-Lorick, who joins us here from ONTAP. Andre, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself and your practice as an operations leader?
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here today. Thanks for putting this together. I've spent my career in operations, manufacturing, and supply chain. We started ONTAP Consulting about 11 years ago. We've worked with hundreds of startups, and yeah, happy to talk on this topic.
Great. So you can read some of the work that we've published together with Andre about materials planning, amongst other things. But we talked about one of the major, I think, inhibitions. One of the biggest inhibitions to moving to a new factory is these house parts on the BOM. I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point that Andre brought up. And that can make it difficult to move somewhere else because your main supplier is actually your factory. So Andre, maybe as that being like a kind of a major hurdle for companies with multiple house parts on the BOM, how do you best mitigate the risk of simultaneously moving and qualifying new parts? That sounds like you're trying to do like 2 things at once instead of just one thing at once.
Yes. Yeah, it's a great question. The more things that you are changing at the same time as you're moving a production line, the more fraught it becomes. Let me start by zooming out and painting a picture of what a horror show moving a production line can be. Many of us have had the experience of like moving with the same CM. So you're just moving, you're staying with the same CM, you're just moving to a different site with that CM. Okay, so you're not changing CMs. And we've done this with some of the leading, EMS providers in the world. Names you would recognize, people you would think would get
Tier
this.
ones, tier twos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the scenario that I'm painting, you're staying with the same CM, you're moving the manufacturing line. So you're recreating the manufacturing line to be identical, the same manufacturing processes, the same jigs, tools, and fixtures, the same suppliers. And even in these cases, in numerous instances, it goes badly. It goes badly. There are delays. There are poor yields. You spend weeks trying to get the yields to match. In some cases, 3 months worth of production was lost. There's one instance I'm thinking of. Of course, the more complex your system is, the system you're building or assembling, the harder this becomes. But even if you keep everything the same, it can be extraordinarily difficult, for a variety of reasons we can go into. But the lesson from this, the takeaway is change as little as possible. Coming back to your question about parts and supplier quals, I think it's worthwhile, at least initially during the line bring up for the new factory, to keep the same suppliers if you can, even if that means some unnatural acts, some mental gymnastics and supply chain contortions. Find ways to minimize the changes in the suppliers and in the parts. It will make the bring up that much easier.
So you can actually do a control run instead of trying to do it like a PRQ aligned with
Yeah.
your control run.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if
Yeah.
too many things change at once and the run goes badly, now you're trying to diagnose why and you don't know.
Yeah. Instrumental could help, but you don't want to have to rely on that. So let's talk about inventory planning, because I think that's like another mistake that I've seen companies seemingly make, where I've heard like a lot of companies have pulled forward and imported like 1 to 2 quarters of inventory prior to tariffs hitting already, like starting back in Q4 of last year, they started pulling forward inventory. So they've like their factories have been running at full tilt for a while, and they're kind of just planning to like slam the brakes. For everyone else who didn't like pull forward inventory, and I think there'd be dragons when you pull forward so much inventory, but for everybody else, how should they think about balancing inventory in various like bonded warehouses, et cetera, versus like how much they're producing at each of these different sites? They shut factory 1 down after they've built a quarter of inventory with the idea factory 2 will like catch it. What's your recommendation around balancing inventory?
All right. I'll give an answer related to best practices from an operations standpoint. This doesn't necessarily take into consideration all of the finance and questions around, the costs involved. One of the worst days in my life as an operator was walking into a CM that we had shut down and telling them to start back up again. We had built ahead, so we thought it was safe to shut them down, but we hadn't built ahead enough. And the new line, the new CM, the new line wasn't coming up fast enough. We had to find some way to meet the demand. And so we went back to the first supplier and went to go turn them back on again. Even in today's environment, you can imagine, right? The tariff situation changes and now suddenly you want to produce in China again. What do you do? Getting a CM to restart after you've stopped them is a nightmare. In a very short amount of time, what we found is that the trained operators had been reassigned. We couldn't get them back. Documentation had vanished. Material had been pilfered by other lines. Jigs and fixtures, were tossed into corners and were damaged. And the spirit of and the will of the company to support us was gone, even though we were willing to pay a premium. So that's why it was so painful. So what's the lesson from this? The lesson and the best practice from an operations standpoint is keep your existing line running, even if it's at low volume, even if there's expense involved, keep it running until the new line is up and proven at the yields and quality levels you want.
That sounds expensive.
Yeah, it might be, but it could end up actually being, cheaper than the alternative. If you have to go back and restart the CMU shutdown, that's expensive. And if you're building ahead, that's also super expensive. People don't think about this often, but the cost of holding inventory, that's a big impact on cash flow, that CFOs are going to care about for sure. The lesson is not build ahead. I understand some people have done it, some industries get away with it, but building ahead is not the ideal answer for operations professionals that are trying to ensure continuity of supply at the right cost and the right quality. And
Yeah.
let me illustrate it this way. Inventory is the root of all evil when you're trying to supply product at the right cost and right quality. Inventory is the root of all evil. Why is that? Because inventory ends up being in the wrong location. If you're holding inventory at different parts of the world to fulfill worldwide demand, you're going to be guessing and it's going to be wrong. So you're going to now spend money to ship it somewhere else. It's going to be the wrong SKU. The more SKUs you have, the more wrong you will be in forecasting the demand for those SKUs. And now you're going to, incur rework expenses. I say you're going to. I've incurred those expenses as we had to rework to try to create the SKUs that were in high demand and make something.
Who knew yellow was going to be the popular color of the season?
Yeah, exactly. The other problem with building ahead, and for those who've already built ahead, you can think about how you mitigate for these risks. But one of the problems with building ahead is that the more time that goes by, the more out of date that product in inventory becomes. It's down rev on firmware. It may be down rev on hardware. You've made changes to improve quality or customer experience or whatever, and you're no longer proud to ship that older unit, and your customers won't accept it. They want the one with the fix. Now you're reworking. I'm saying you're reworking. I have reworked and incurred those costs. So that's why it's expensive. It can be brutally expensive to build ahead. Inventory doesn't age well. If you have batteries, they'll slowly start to lose their charge. If the inventory is sitting in a warehouse, it's exposed to environmental factors and more handling damage. So if you can, keep your existing line running and don't build ahead.
All right. Good advice from the School of Hard Knocks. Thank you so much, Andre. We have one more minute. What's your, give us a 1-minute pep talk for other operations leaders who are just been either in Asia for the last however many weeks trying to deal with this problem, or in a lot of uncomfortable meetings right now. What advice do you have for them?
All right. Well, I've been painting some of these horror scenarios, nightmare scenarios, and so I've been thinking about this pep talk question. Here's the thing: if you're an operations leader dealing with this, and you try to deal with it business as usual, you will be crushed, and your team will be crushed. You can't just layer this on top of everything else you and your team have to do. You're not going to manage this in your regular one-on-ones with your people and in your regular weekly staff meeting, right? It requires some extra effort. If you rally your team and you bring that extra effort, this can be an extraordinary opportunity for you, for your people, and for your company. Cut your people some slack on their regular day-to-day responsibilities. And my recommendation in a nutshell is set up a cross-functional tiger team. You can call it whatever you want, a task force, but create a team that's focused on this, that can bring the right speed and urgency. Have daily meetings, short, sweet daily meetings, nightly calls with the factory if that's what it takes. And if you take this kind of approach and you rally this team, you can give your best people an opportunity to shine. People rise to the occasion in a crisis. You'll see growth in your people. You can develop, team spirit with this cross-functional tiger team, and the team can come out stronger, and you can deliver for your company.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Andre, and dropping your knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Next up, we have Bill Carter Giannini. who will hopefully be coming on camera here. And Bill is an engineering leader and is now at Brightlink. Bill, joining us? Okay, great. I see action and motion, but I don't see an image yet. Bill, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, interesting. It says my video is working. All right, well,
Guess we'll do it audio.
do it audio. Let me see if I can, oh, there we go.
Perfect.
All right. Yes, hi everyone. My name is Bill Cartaginini with Brightlink. My focus is building and managing hardware development teams for all kinds of products across all industries. So much like Andre on the operations side, I'm on the MPI engineering side, and in a similar way, focus on solutions and shipping product.
Awesome. Sounds great. So given the engineering focus, let's talk about, we've just heard from Andre around having to rally teams, cross-functional teams, operations, engineering together. I think one of the resource contentions I've seen within our customer base is about how engineering teams get allocated to supporting factory moves versus new MPI projects. What do you think needs to take priority, or how do organizations handle the fact they essentially have twice as much engineering work and probably the same size team?
Yeah, a lot of companies are asking that right now.
So give us the free advice.
Well, Andre did steal my very first bullet point, and that is I believe firmly in developing tiger teams. So these kind of supports structures are not new to engineering development teams. Every single NPI engineer on the planet has worked in post-ramp qualifications, in sustaining engineering, at the tail end of NPI, where we ramp to production and support initial production. That's the experience we're talking about here. So we're not actually talking about building something new. We're seeing something that we've done well and many times before in a new light, in a new space of the process. And I think for the business side of things, you need to understand, how much is this worth to you? How much is it worth to your business? And how much are you going to invest in it? Because this is an investment, right?
Yep.
It is, every time you invest MPI resources in something like this, that means they're not developing your next product. So, but this is a product, and the way to be successful is to treat it as you would treat any other product development cycle. That means putting together a team of dedicated support engineers and operations together, putting together a program plan, so program management functions, and deciding how you're going to run this. A lot of companies have used joint development models where they have relied on suppliers at their CMs or at their JDM partner in Asia, right? That's not going to work as well here. And so there are some cases where that can work, but you really need to go in very open-minded and open-eyed into what's feasible. And so a lot of this is internalizing what we already do on the late stages of development. But the team, there are some new risks. In the late stages of development for a normal product development cycle, you have signed a contract. There's nothing but upward trajectory. There's alignment between the CM or JDM partner, the manufacturing partner, and your company and your team. And here you're diametrically opposed, right? So this requires a level of discipline and finesse at all levels to be successful. Whether or not you can rely on that partner is a big question. That's something that is an individual relationship management issue. How you go about integrating your team and gathering that data, again, a lot of risk around there. There are mechanisms that, I think all of us have talked about. How do we use the tools? And we'll talk about that later. But from how do I go build a team, you need a dedicated team. And I would put a cross-functional engineering group together, 3 to 5 people per, program that you're trying to execute. Hardware engineering, program management, test and quality, ops team support with GCM and OPM. That's that tiger team that Andre talked about. But on the engineering side, the kinds of engineers matter as well. There are concept engineers, there are innovation engineers. We need the more
There's get shit done engineers.
get shit done engineers. Yes. And everybody who's worked with engineers knows what I'm talking about, right? There's those that you go to for the crazy new ideas, and those that you go to deliver. And there's a couple of unicorns in between, but you really need those functional deliverers. And what you need to do is to get them the the source of their diet that they need, which is data. And
Mm.
so this very quickly goes from how do you build a team and who's on that team to how do you get high quality data to that
Why
team.
do you need data, Bill?
Well, engineers will sit around until they have requirements, right?
Got it.
There needs to be a data set to drive the engineering process.
So you're talking about data from the new line that's coming up, or data that's coming from the line that's being decommissioned. And
Yes, yes, and
and so
yes.
they need that. So what are some of the best practices for kind of collecting up that last best state at site one? And then like how do you redeploy and collect up the appropriate data at site two, given that's so important for the engineers on the project to be successful?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first, before any of that, and I think it's critical because in times of fear, people just want to go do things really fast. Please don't go execute. Please spend the time to develop a strategy, plan out what you're trying to accomplish. You know, spend this is a program. Do the work up front, develop your requirements, develop your goals, and then execute. So that means building a team and understanding what your target is. And for the business, right? I hear a lot about I need to save costs because tariffs are such a big deal. In an operationally overhead driven business, tariffs are a piece of the overall operation. And so understanding, kind of what time means to your business from an operational cost perspective is just as important as the tariff. So anyway, that gets into like how do you prioritize how much you're going to spend on this? Um, in a perfect world, we can rely on the supplier to be successful, right? But that is not going to happen here. So the tricks are in there are a bunch of processes that we've talked about that I work with clients to develop plans and getting down into a checklist of gathering the right kinds of data to transition. But you know there's no way to sugarcoat the fact that you need someone there to that you can trust, whether that's at your existing factory site or your new factory site. Good data comes from trust, people you trust, sources you trust. I can tell you a long list of stories about developing products in China specifically with hidden failure modes, right?
Mm.
Suppliers, if you think you're going to transition something, how much do you really know about that thing? Because the vast majority of the programs I've worked on in the millions of units, suppliers have hidden 50% yield losses for the first couple months. So, right, you're going to go deploy your new, you think you know what it is, product to a new place. Are you prepared for 50% yield losses in the first 3 months? Because that's what's going to happen, right? Without good
Well,
data.
and having your initial site one information really helps you solve that particular problem. Like
100%.
I had this experience, I will not name the explicit products, but these are products I worked on and was responsible for as an engineer. And it was supposed to be a speed bump. And it's literally building on the line next to a line that's running in production on the same product. And our antenna yields are like 50%. And we haven't changed the antenna. That's not changed in this design. Uh, and yeah, I walk over onto the production line and I see they're literally cheating the test. They're like adding masking tape on top of the antenna, like a big stack of it to detune it when they put it into the test. Like, oh, okay. This is that's the difference. Is on the production line we're cheating, and on the development line we're not. I guess we
Right,
had this antenna that was probably detuned that's been shipping for a year.
right, right. And the difference is where you're at and what you're looking at, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and so I think
absolutely.
the way I would at a high level categorize this is getting away from unknown states.
Yes.
So getting a baseline. to section off the known from the unknown. So when
Yes.
you get to your new state at your new supplier, you're going to have all kinds of unknown unknowns. But what's going to dramatically enable you to shorten that timeline
Yep.
is to, as well as possible, draw a box around your knowns,
Yeah.
gather that data.
It was
So
always
that,
like this. We've been building it for a
yep,
year and our customers aren't complaining. This is a new spec. It's not new. All of that stuff saves a lot of time. So you focus on the new things that are actually a problem with the
yeah, that
product.
don't layer on top of,
Yeah.
failure modes at aggregate. So I think Andre was talking about this as well, where, the data that you have, that you're transitioning over isn't, like, if you just assume that it's good enough quality, you could be running into a massive risk that you don't even realize. So I'd focus there. I'd focus the team there on ensuring that what you think you know is actually known.
Yeah. All right. That's a great place to land us. Thank you so much, Bill, for your insights here and for supporting the engineering leaders that I see in our attendees today. Appreciate your time. And we're going to
Thanks.
transition. We have Jen McCabe joining us. So hopefully she can turn her camera on and join us on the stage. Hi, Jen. Jen, do you want to quickly introduce yourself so people can evaluate what you're going to say appropriately?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Anna and team. My name is Jen McCabe. I'm a director of engineering in the connected products practice at PwC. The standard disclaimers apply. I'm going to be speaking from my own experience and making recommendations that are fairly aggressive. So please take that into context as I give you my feedback. Also, voice is going, but whose isn't at this point in tariff land. So please bear with me here. But super excited to be here and give some pretty practical kind of feedback on how you might be able to optimize some things that you may not have considered to get through this next period of 3 to 6 months as we all kind of look for a place of stasis or a way to create a place of peace in an unstable environment.
Oh, wow. What an aspiration, a place of peace.
Place of peace.
All right, let's get into it. So it looks like the executive order on the de minimis loophole goes into effect, or closing it goes into effect maybe May 2nd. That's what my sources told me here. And that's where packages under $800 in value could enter duty free. But it sounds like you have some thoughts or have some strategies around maybe some more aggressive or creative strategies around de minimis as part of a go forward strategy for companies that I hadn't heard about. So maybe you could share a little bit about thinking about how you've been thinking about de minimis personally, Jen McCabe.
This is a
And
weird
from
one.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a weird one. I'll have to say, for those of you who are watching previously, personally, I'm a big fan of de minimis, especially in the consumer electronics world. But like the risk level and the utility of de minimis does vary by type of good, right? So for consumer electronics, though, it has been a boon in the past, and hopefully will be a boon in the future. But while we wait to see what happens, the revocation of de minimis is due to go into effect on May 2nd. We see companies doing a couple things. One, companies are actually stopping shipments to the US. So contrary to what we all thought would happen, or what some of us thought would happen, some categories of goods and companies have advanced forward shipments, trying to bulk up their inventory in the US pre-holiday. But more and more companies are just holding. So they're actually canceling shipments, particularly C. We're not sure yet, because it's too soon to tell, whether or not companies are beginning to do what is one of the first suggestions, which is redesign your master cartons or break down your MCs into something that allows individual shipments to meet the de minimis thresholds. We're hearing more and more companies look at
the $800.
yeah, correct. We're hearing more and more companies, if they didn't previously, examine drop shipping direct from Asia and China in particular. This is extremely challenging if you've never done it before. It's also challenging if we encounter any kind of port shutdown, air cargo shutdown related to these delays, whether it's rescheduled shipments because there's not enough cargo, or too many shipments because there's too much cargo and people are trying to get it out of Asia into US. So that is one recommendation. Break your stuff down now. Do some ship tests. So break it down into several different configurations, see if anything has problems getting through US Customs. We are hearing, not even just in the US, but in other countries, more physical inspections of goods by customs. So just a note here, double check your HTS codes, double check how obvious those things are related to what might happen if a customs officer opens up your physical shipment. And here's my suggestion related to that. Have a package prepared that has things like images of the as shipped SOP, ready to verify, potentially even CAD, right, with material descriptions and bill of materials to verify. So this is all in case your goods get held, whether it's using your old or existing MasterCard and SOP or a new, running a new de minimis threshold test. Okay, so that being said, lots of us have plenty of goods in the US, plenty of goods stateside actually. They're just already in the hands of consumers, and they're in the hands of consumers who intend to return them. So when we're looking at trying to increase inventory and reduce cost of goods coming into the US, maybe another way to think about it is analyze how many goods you actually have in the US now. So look at your reverse logistics. Again, almost all of our risk mitigation strategies to date have focused on forward logistics. What's your return path? A lot of us, for ease and convenience, we're on a return and replace. So customers would fill out an RMA, right? And they would ship to a DC somewhere in the US, wherever we designated our RMA, mini DC. And then we'd hold those goods until we got a MasterCard in full, or 2 or 5 or 10 or whatever that threshold is. And then we'd ship them, generally speaking, back to Asia. Some of them might be reworked, a large portion of them might be scrapped. You don't have to send all those goods back to Asia. You can set up a mini rework line at your DC in the US or through one of the many, many US-based services and facilities that provide that. This does require pretty decent product knowledge though. So if your design and engineering has been distanced from your actual production, the first thing to do is assess, like do a teardown, right? Crack your product, see how far you are from your actual SOP, because as was just discussed, you could be pretty significantly off center of where you thought you were and where you thought your rework operations needed to be. So crack some units, do some investigative teardowns. The next thing you should do, I was literally just whiteboarding this out for a colleague, like run an analysis on your current SOP, whether it's return and replace or repair and replace in Asia. Remember to include your tests. Again, based on what was just shared, you have to include the opportunity cost of the test at the end of the rework before you would be shipping out a refurb or a rebuild unit. Quantify your opportunity cost. So figure out at what threshold or volume of goods based on your unit costs, etc., this and your MSRP, this would make sense for you to do. Then get your quotes. Don't invert that order. Don't panic and get your quotes first, because if you don't know if this is a good business decision, don't waste your time and all these vendors trying to figure that out, right? Figure out if this is going to be a good scenario for you and then get your quotes. And then do your final CBA executive presentations to get to your yes, no point. The good news is you can set this up pretty quickly. If you have close-based engineering design knowledge, which lots of us on this call do actually, which is fantastic, then you can even run this just like you would a build cycle, right? You can send your design and engineering leads to site at your mini DC, have a period of overlap where you're setting up the operations, authoring the SOP, using a tool like Instrumental, etc., to import that knowledge into the new way of working, and then establish your rework line. Now, there is an additional loop here for your marketing and sales teams to consider, and that is that we generally like refurb is a dirty word, right? Or like a sales clearance kind of term. It doesn't have to be that way though. There are plenty of companies that are using refurb, refresh, or rebuild lines, and they're marketing them as sustainability, right, to their end customers. So especially in the era of like throwaway electronics, this might be a decent kind of marketing boon to customers who are concerned about replaceability, etc. And especially when you throw in the giant T word that would otherwise have their cost of goods rising 3 to 5x, it becomes a potentially really kind of appetizing scenario. So this is one that I would say, again, I haven't heard anybody exploring yet. We're now beginning to analyze this for folks, and it's definitely worth a hard quantitative look. Another thing that companies are doing, and you may want to consider, is You can buy up bonded warehouse space in DCs that are non-stateside and also not China. If you haven't already done that, I would do that now, because those spaces are going to disappear as people look for places to park goods if they have adopted a wait and see approach. But look in places like Vietnam, India, etc., Germany, elsewhere. You can ship out of China to those. Hold if you have the powder to burn, and the inventory already stateside, and see what happens over the next 3 to 6 months, as long as you book that bonded space for that volume of goods that you would generally move in that 3 to 6 month period. But that space is going fast and is going to go faster, as companies adjust their forecasts based on earnings, especially the tech codes that are coming out soon here. I rambled on, but thanks, Anna. I think I'll take a breath there.
Yeah, you covered all the things. I just want to quickly go back to make sure this point around de minimis is like clear. De minimis is expiring, but the reason why you would break your master carton down to meet the prior de minimis threshold is because of a bet that you'd be making that there'd be some sort of deal or some sort of walk back of that policy. You're kind of betting to like whether it would be at that
Hedging.
same level, et cetera.
Yes.
It's a hedge. But that's
Yes.
that's why you would go do that is a
Yes.
hedge on that policy.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
and there's a secondary mini forcing function there for most teams that have not, like, it's a cheat in a way from an ops perspective. Most teams that have not broken down to that level, it's close to what it would be for a lot of us to dropship. And so you can analyze your de minimis and do a dropship test at the same time if you work it that way. So be efficient with your time, because that's something we're all short on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It seems like there are a lot of burning priorities right now in operations organizations, supply chain organizations, and even engineering if they're trying to do an MPI, like they might be in the middle of MPIs for Christmas season or, beyond, and prioritizing all of these things. You've seen a lot of stuff go sideways and a lot of stuff go well and probably some stuff go bad. And you're working inside of some of the most admired companies in the world right now who have really smart people on these challenges. And you've also worked within the factory side and kind of seen that perspective. What's your advice on how to really see the forest for the trees in terms of priority for leaders that are just in this swirl right now? Like what is the priority? Is there a framework or just like a pithy statement? Be brilliant here, Jen.
No pressure, no pressure. I would say, like, look, we've said this in a bunch of the different webinars, but at this point, use the leadership that you have in your company. Rely on that and each other. Rely on your trusted vendor networks. Everybody is going to get through this together. It's just a matter of how fast and with how much pain, right? But collaborate fully. Like, if you're not very transparent with your vendors, now is the time to maybe turn that corner. Vulnerability helps here. Do not be afraid to ask people for help to the extent that they possibly can. My experience worldwide has been they will. And I would definitely say, like, use this time to think, as much as this sounds challenging, to think with real care about the options that you have and how those are going to reflect back on your company over the longer term. And longer term, I mean like this year, not like next week, but
Medium
this
term.
year. Yeah. Are these things that we're planning? Do they match our customers' needs? Do they match what we say to vendors? Do they match our identity? Are they true north, or are they something that we're just reacting to and might run counter to our culture or our way of working? Don't sacrifice your long-term brand reputation for short-term gains here.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jen, for joining us. I know you're incredibly busy. Really appreciate the time.
Yes. Thanks.
All right. Next, we're going to have Zach and David join us. So David Kalinowski, maybe you could share a little bit about your background, your perspective, and then we'll have Zach Scott introduce himself as well.
Awesome. Thanks. Hey, everyone. Background, consumer electronics for the last 10-ish years. Worked at a few of the usual suspects, and currently, still in consumer electronics, working on AI wearables with Sesame, leading product design over here.
All right. Thanks, David. Zach? Oh, you're on mute.
Zach, VP of hardware at Backbone. So we're building next generation gaming systems. Was at Apple before this, Formlabs, and really interested in discussing and investigating how technologies like instrumental and new hardware development processes can radically increase the speed of development. Because when we're looking at a new space like where gaming is going right now, it's really critical to be able to ship multiple NPIs every couple of years, not just go and stick with the traditional sustaining engineering and multi-year development cycle.
Yeah, awesome. So the reason I've invited both Zach and David is that they are some of the leaders I admire the most around pushing the envelope of how to do something really awesome in the startup context, which is often some of the most resource constrained context. And both of them have multiple experiences leveraging instrumental technologies as well as other technologies that are enabling them to be successful as leaders. And so I invited them here to help make the connection for folks on the call to those technologies, and also to how you could use the technology like instrumental, which is, you might think about as for NPI, as for development. How is that relevant here in a world where you're trying to shift to a new factory, bring up new lines very quickly, and get to full rate production somewhere else? So they both have personal experience with that. And we'll be chatting about that here, as well as their own experiences and focus areas in this very tumultuous time. So maybe as a first question, if you may or may not be, we're not revealing anything, you may or may not be thinking about moving your own production now. And so if you were doing that, and for the folks on the call, would instrumental be in your arsenal, and why?
Well,
You want to go first?
go for it.
Sure. I mean, I can go first. I don't mind. I mean, yes, obviously, duh. What kind of a question is that? No, yeah. In all seriousness, if you're doing MPI, I've always seen instrumentals like no matter where things are happening, especially if they're happening in new places that maybe have less developed support ecosystems, infrastructure, it's even more important. But I always look at it as a acceleration for root cause while you're doing MPI. Like it has always helped all the teams and all the programs I've worked on just find the problem quicker, especially when it's harder to get to those places. There's less support staff, less experienced staff. Absolutely, it is a must have. I feel like it's table stakes now when you're doing hardware development.
Great, thanks, David. Zach?
Yep, absolutely agree. I mean, we integrated instrumental like while we were developing basically our first product. And the reason why is when we're looking at the NPI process in a new factory, you're going to not just be building the product there and even the line, but you've got to retrain the culture and the expertise of all of those OPs and engineers that we've really taken for granted in the last 40 years that China's had. Anything we can do to have double or triple redundancy on the data we're getting. Somebody previous, I think it was Andre, talked about the data as being critical for your teams. It's not just getting the data, right? And this is exactly what Andre was saying. It's what is the quality of that data? What we love about instrumental is it is a ground truth, golden standard piece of data. We know it's real. It was set up by us. There's no incentives by the vendor or anybody else on the line. And we can use that data to base our most critical decisions. When we're developing hardware this fast, like we are at Backbone, trying to get into 20,000 retail stores every year in brand new form factors with partners like Apple and Microsoft, we cannot afford to make any mistakes, but we still have to make decisions quickly. So what instrumental lets us do is we never have to guess or question whether or not the data we're getting is valid. We always know, it's like our secret ace in the hole, that we can read and see the answer and then make those critical decisions on point without having to be concerned that we're making the wrong call and betting the program on improper information.
No, that's awesome. The leaders that are on this call and that will receive the recording of this and are kind of in this storm right now, they got 99 problems, and like, which one should they focus on? I'd be interested in each of your advice as leaders who've really been through the ringer and the school of hard knocks in not highly resourced environments, for what your advice would be around prioritization. Like, what should they focus on in that storm? Yeah, maybe Zach, you could start.
There's always going to be much, much more work than you can get done. And if there's not, then you're probably doing something wrong, right? Because if everything is going fine and you have no risk and everything's going great, you either miss something incredibly critical or you're not trying hard enough, right? So you should be failing at like 30 to 40% of the things you've put on your task list. So great piece of advice I got from a mentor was shoot the wolf closest to the door. And it's a great one, right? Because it's like, look, everything matters, everything could sink you. But the only way you can win as a startup or a lean hardware company is by taking smart risks and getting lucky. And you want to make that luck by using as much as you can technologies like Instrumental or having a really unique development culture or adding 3D printers from Formlabs like we have at scale in order to make it so that you can maybe not shoot all the wolves, but you can definitely get the first 2 or 3. And then you just got to get lucky enough that by the time you shoot those 2, you know, this analogy is getting a lot there, but you're able to reload, get the 3rd wolf. You know what I mean? And so the point is, don't stress so much about the fear, which is easier said than done, of like, could any of these things sink us? The answer is yes. The right question is, how good of a bet can you make here? And then everything beyond that is up to the hardware gods.
All right. Very inspirational. I love it. David, what are your thoughts?
I mean, just as a startup, you really have to focus on what is the phrase when people say like do what makes your beer better. Like you really have to focus on the thing that matters for the customer. And so um again, tying it back to instrumental, basically that if you know what matters to your customer, like at a previous company, uh, Opal camera, we knew that cosmetics were super key. And as we ramped up the Tadpole camera, we were like, okay, we really need to focus on cosmetics. That's what this whole brand is built around. And we leveraged instrumental to let us ramp to MP faster and like reduce our yield issues. Um, and ultimately, I think it was like a good win for the company because we focused on what mattered for us and we leveraged those tools to enable that to happen quicker. Yeah,
So
it was a fun one.
prioritize your customers and the elements that'll matter to them most in the product,
Yeah,
essentially.
an instrumental can help you do that.
Yeah, I think so. I like to think so. What do you think, I guess in terms of, before we kind of turn it over to Q&A, what are, I guess, what is the core advice that you think we talked about kind of how to prioritize, but as leaders think about the challenges of the teams that they're leading through these moments, I appreciate the leadership that both of you provide in your organizations. What do you think is really important for them to think about how they motivate everybody else on the team to get things done?
Mhm. That's a tough one. I think if anything, we're all human. We're all trying to do our best. Opportunities arise when, there's tough situations right now. There's an interesting tariff situation, somewhat like high volatility in our supply chains. I think the biggest piece of advice is just like looking at things through a positive lens and saying like, hey, like we're in a tough situation, but this is an opportunity where we can out execute our
Yeah,
competition and really shine. Like let's just focus on what's the best we can do, and that will differentiate us from everyone else, hopefully. I
yeah,
think generally that's how our team over at Sesame Elise is thinking about things.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think
Zach?
first of all, I definitely agree with you, David. And additionally, it's also an opportunity to force function and stress test your entire organization. So we all know in hardware, like at the end of the day, everything goes wrong and a single decision could tank your product. And so when things are going well, it's really easy to kind of just sweep everything under the rug. Maybe not all of your rel tests get followed up on. Maybe some of your vendors aren't getting the data back. We had this happen at Backbone for the first year and a half. Things were going great. We were making a ton of money. We didn't really audit a lot of our suppliers and our processes. And then we started having problems. And when the tariffs came, it was really a stress test to see if the team and the culture we had rebuilt, if it was able to withstand a moment like this of crisis. And in the end, we were able to do it, and it brought the team together. And so I think the biggest value of having this situation is it really tells you how good your team and your culture is. And if you can make it through this, you can make it through anything. And at the end of the day, like David's saying, a lot of these companies might not make it who are your competitors, especially if they're not able to do it. And so on the other side of any kind of bottleneck function, there's always some pretty big rewards for the companies that were able to figure out how to actually execute and the ones that had the preparation and the culture and the team to be successful.
Yeah, crisis-opportunity, as Keith Lucas would say. It's a crisis-opportunity. Awesome. Well,
Is that
thank
the name of his new book?
no, it's impact, but to be released soon.
Crisis-opportunity. That's
Crisis-opportunity. Yeah. So if the whole goal is to get up to full rate production somewhere else, do you think that Instrumental cuts days out of that process in getting up to full rate production? Is that
Yes,
reasonable?
of course.
David, think so?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, unless you want to have your team deployed and basically living in region wherever that might be.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. We're going to now open up for Q&A. So if you have, so maybe everybody who's still on, Andre, Bill, you can turn your cameras back on. We'll pile back in. We have a couple questions that came in through the Q&A modal. So we can kind of get at those to the extent that it makes sense in this group to answer some of these. So, and I think that we'll be able to have some diverse perspectives here across this panel to some of these. So the first question here is around the best data points. What are the best data points that the get stuff done engineers need to have to be able to get the most stuff done? And how do you identify and support those get stuff done engineers to avoid burnout? And they could be operations folks too, but like essentially the get shit done people on your team as leaders, how do we best enable them? Anyone have perspective?
Yeah, I'm interested in the second part of that question, which is how do you identify and support GSD engineers to avoid burnout?
Yeah.
Adaptability and self-motivation is the most important thing we found for interviewing people for GSD. And Anna, we've talked about this before. I think Anna's got actually some of the best interview processes I've ever seen. But you have to be able to find people that are not just self-motivated, but are adaptable, because as your startup grows or as your company changes, like moving to another country, you need full adaptability with every single DRI. And when we talk about how to avoid burnout, the best way we've found is when you do have people that are self-motivated and adaptable, make the ratio of their work input to their output, as in the results they generate, as close to 1-to-1 as possible. The thing that kills get shit done engineers is churn. Getting slowed down, having their work be thrown away, having somebody else on the team have a miss because the data was bad. One of the worst things that's ever happened to us was before we had Instrumental, we made an entire massive decision for an inspection process on this critical input component based on vendor data that ended up being like, they just totally wrong. Like they had no idea what they were doing. And so we had to throw away like 3 intense weeks of work. That is the most demotivating thing that can happen to somebody who really cares about getting shit done. And so, having that ground truth data be super good, and then having that culture and the talent of everybody else on the team being a get shit done engineer will allow them to see that output. And as long as they keep seeing that all those weekends and late nights they put in are resulting in tangible output benefits to build a revolutionary product, they will continue to show up, because all of that just comes back as victory when you ship the product or have a big win.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to pile in?
I mean, I'll have like a more tactical one. Just if you're using certain tools and like you've designed something, you put it in the line and you're like holding your breath, waiting for it to go through and see like, does it come to fruition? How does this pan out? The best data point is being able to have those live data points back to your engineers so they can know like, did I make the right design decision? And like, how am I going to pivot into the next build? Or like, those data points are super critical, and you get those with certain data collection platforms. I'm just trying to think about many. I'm thinking about many past examples where like I myself have done that. I've like made a decision, went into a build, got to see the data almost real time, and it like validated, okay, this is the right decision, or this was the wrong decision, and here's how we change it for the next build. That's super key. That really helps with avoiding burnout because you avoid the churn, like Zach was bringing up, by just it's crystal clear data sometimes, most of the time.
Yeah. And Anna, you've talked about this before, getting away from that dive and save mechanism that's so familiar to, and important, but, overly indexed perhaps on large organizations doing high volume consumer electronics deployment. I think here the same thing applies, right? The better your quality of data, the less chance for the attacking the falling knife and maybe missing. I think also making sure that you have access to the data stream. So I believe Andre was talking early about don't turn off your factory and turn it back on and expect everything to work, right? Here we are turning on a new factory that's never been run before, turning it on and hoping that it works. Well, is your current factory running? Because the data set that you're talking about needs to come from somewhere. And when you take a look at your overall strategy of where do I put my team, how do I deploy them, how do I get them good quality data, you need to be really careful about the operations and making sure that you're getting that data from a live flowing river and not a stagnant pond.
Yeah, real time ideally. Because ain't nobody got time for waste, right? Andre, did you want to weigh in on this one?
I'll just add this point that I think to avoid burnout and get the most out of your high performing team members, give them some autonomy. Don't try to micromanage them. You're asking them to work nights and weekends and travel. When they come back, after a trip, don't, tell them to take a Monday off. Make sure they're getting some rest and give them room to figure out, their schedules and their deliverables.
All right. Next question. For a small team with limited resources that's reliant on a single OEM factory in China, what's a realistic first move to start de-risking and exploring alternatives without blowing up the business?
Perhaps I could start.
Yeah.
So the first place I would start is with your existing CM. Can they help? Undoubtedly they've been asked this before. Perhaps you've asked them. Many CMs in China have been working on their own factories outside of China. They're trying to accelerate those projects now. If they don't have those projects, they've been trying to form alliances with factories outside of China for exactly this problem. So start with them, right? You can do it in a way that protects the relationship. Tell them you love them. Tell them that you're a long-term partner. Ask them for their help. If they can't help, they don't have an answer, my next question would be, rather than it moving an existing line, can you start a new NPI activity elsewhere outside of China? It's going to be much easier than trying to move a line, especially if the end of life of that product is, in sight later this year or early next year. If that doesn't work, then, and you really are thinking about a new CM selection process, think about country of origin. If all of your high value parts and components are still coming from China, you're still facing the same challenge. So think about country of origin before jumping down the rabbit hole.
Essentially tariff engineering upfront versus after the fact.
Yeah.
Great advice. Anybody else want to add something to that list?
Sure. One thing you can try to do is see what you can pull upstream in the supply chain. So like your tier twos, folks that are feeding things into FATP, where can you expand their skill, like what they're doing as well? Again, similar to what Andre's bringing up, what else can they do for you? How can they help you? And maybe you start doing some sub-assemblies upstream and you start pulling things out of FATP, or maybe you start duplicating it to at some point where you need to then, when you need to recreate FATP somewhere else, it makes it easier. So building de-risk by using more of your sub-suppliers is actually can be quite beneficial.
Especially if those sub-suppliers have different country of origin, that could be favorable. That could also help with your tariff engineering.
Yeah, and I would say get advice, right? This is why, look at this panel of amazing, experienced people. Like, reach out to people. You know those people. You're running a business. You're in a network of startups, of other founders. Get advice before you take action. That's the first step.
All right. On that note, I think we're going to call it. Thank you, everybody, for joining for our day's worth of content compacted into an hour. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be sending out the recording as well as a kind of a one page with deep links into the video later today. So thank you for joining us and best wishes on your swirls, your tariff swirls. Okay.
Anna,
Thank you.
see you guys. Good
Thanks.
luck.